In a culture that idolizes effort, where every self-help book screams, try harder, push more, or grind until it hurts, Charles Bukowski offers a radically different gospel. 2 words carved into his tombstone: don't try. To most, it sounds like failure, like laziness disguised as poetry. But for Bukowski, it was a warning against the trap of artificial striving. He wasn't telling people to sit idle and rot. He was saying, don't fake it. Don't force something that doesn't come from the raw, chaotic center of your being. When Bukowski said, don't try, he meant that true art, true living, can't be extracted by sheer force. It must emerge, like a volcano, like blood through an open wound. The best writing, the most honest love, the realest moments, they don't arrive by trying to look perfect. They happen when you stop reaching outward and let something deep rise from within. The moment you try to be profound, you're already lying. You're not writing truth, you're writing performance. Bukowski detested performance. He lived in defiance of it. He spent years working meaningless jobs, drowning in booze, rejected by publishers. But he didn't force poetry. He let it rise when it needed to. It was ugly rude, sometimes brilliant, sometimes brutal, but it was alive. It was his, and that's what mattered. You don't try to become something you're not. You become by burning down what's false. In Bukowski's world, the man who doesn't try isn't apathetic, he's honest. He doesn't chase what the world demands. He listens to the voice beneath the noise, the voice that whispers what you were born to say, not what they'll applaud. This voice doesn't need permission. It doesn't need structure. It just needs space. And space begins where forced ambition ends. Bukowski never pretended to be anything more than what he was. Drunk, broke, angry, brilliant. While the world crafted masks of success, spiritual virtue, and social grace, he tore his off and walked into the chaos bare-faced. He didn't glamorize suffering, but he refused to sanitize it. He believed that the real tragedy wasn't being flawed. It was pretending not to be. To live what you are, in Bukowski's world, means owning every crooked edge of your personality, every dark impulse, every scar and crack in the foundation. Because until you do, you're only playing a role in someone else's drama. To Bukowski, pretense was the death of authenticity. Trying to be noble, successful, or refined by society's standards was a spiritual lie. He despised what he called the phony intellectuals. The writers who wrote not because they had something to say, but because they wanted to be seen as writers. He mocked the workplace, not out of laziness, but because it demanded masks of politeness, efficiency, ambition, that suffocated the human soul. The danger wasn't failing at society's game. The danger was never realizing it was a game to begin with. When you stop trying to become something you're not, you make room for what you are to finally surface. Bukowski didn't live to impress. He lived to express. He didn't write to fit in. He wrote to survive. His life was messy, full of contradiction, but it was his. And that's what made it beautiful in its own brutal way. To live what you are, you have to stop performing. You have to accept the silence inside, the violence, the need, the boredom, the rage. You have to accept that maybe you're not meant to be a polished success story, but something far more honest, far more wild, and far more human. Pain was not a stranger to Charles Bukowski. It was his closest companion. Rejection letters, abusive childhood, physical illness, broken relationships, and decades spent in obscurity. His life reads like a slow, grinding war with suffering. But what made Bukowski different wasn't that he experienced pain. It was what he did with it. He didn't escape it, deny it, or numb it with false optimism. He stared it in the face and wrote it into his blood-soaked verses. He understood that pain, when accepted rather than avoided, becomes a kind of forge. Not a punishment, but a pressure that can shape something rare and real. Bukowski's poetry and prose never tried to sugarcoat the bleakness of life. Instead, he found beauty within it, within the dull routines, the cheap motels, the empty bottles, the moments of fleeting clarity that came only after everything else fell apart. He never tried to rise above pain. He sank into it until it spoke. He let it mold his voice, not define his worth. The difference is critical. To let pain define you is to let it consume you, to allow victimhood to become identity. But to let it shape you is to transmute it, to carve meaning from the suffering rather than surrender to it. In the modern world, we're told to overcome, to move on, to distract ourselves with self-help slogans and pretty affirmations. Bukowski rejected that. He knew the truth that the wound is not the enemy. It's the teacher. His most powerful work was born from the raw nerve of experience. He wrote not despite the pain, but because of it. Not to fix it, but to give it form. Because once you give your suffering a shape, it no longer controls you. It becomes part of your voice. And in that voice, others who suffer might finally feel seen. Rebellion, in Bukowski's world, wasn't found in shouting slogans or marching under banners. It wasn't political theater or grand gestures. His rebellion was far quieter and far more dangerous. It was the refusal to lie about who he was. While others hid behind polite conversation and socially acceptable goals, Bukowski let his ugliness show. He didn't pretend to be wise, or kind, or sober, or enlightened. He was tired, bitter, funny, violent, soft, sad, and completely unapologetic. In a world trained to present a version of self for validation, Bukowski's refusal to perform was an act of war against conformity. He didn't need to shout to be radical. Simply by being honest, he disrupted the illusions others built around themselves. He exposed the hypocrisy in the systems that claimed to value intelligence, art, and truth, but only when it came wrapped in the right tone, the right vocabulary, the right face. His words weren't academic. They were vulgar, real, spoken in the same voice he used to order a beer, curse the man sitting next to him. He didn't polish his soul to make it more acceptable. He let it remain sharp, rusted, and real. In this way, Bukowski's rebellion wasn't against power. It was against pretense. It wasn't about changing the system. It was about refusing to be changed by it. He didn't want to fit in. He wanted to feel alive, and for that, he had to stay raw, to keep his edges, to not be softened by approval or broken by rejection, to live his own rhythm, write his own way, and bleed honestly onto every page he touched. The revolution for him wasn't in shouting back at the world. It was in never letting the world rewrite who he was. That kind of rebellion doesn't make headlines, but it makes art that lasts centuries. Bukowski never sat at a desk with the intention to impress. He didn't aim for awards or recognition. In fact, he was repelled by the idea of writing for praise. He wrote because he had to, because the words gnawed at his insides if he didn't let them out. That is the core of his philosophy. Creation should not come from calculation, but from compulsion. The moment you begin trying to impress, whether an editor, an audience, or even your own ego, you've already drifted from truth. You've abandoned the rawness that makes art, or any act of self-expression, feel alive. Bukowski's work didn't appeal to everyone. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't polite, but it was honest, and that honesty, however brutal, resonated. Because deep down, people are starving for something real, something that doesn't hide behind polish and posturing. When you create from the desire to be accepted, you're no longer creating from the soul. You're creating from fear, from image, from insecurity. Bukowski had none of that. He embraced being the outsider, the failure, the dirty old man with a pen full of blood and ash. And in doing so, he tapped into something more universal than the polished voices ever could. In today's world, where everything is curated, filtered, and marketed, the idea of "don't try to impress" feels almost revolutionary. Yet Bukowski lived by it. Whether it was his poetry, his lifestyle, or his unapologetic love for the ordinary and the obscene, he made no effort to seem more than he was. That was his power, and ironically, in not trying to be impressive, he became unforgettable. This paradox lies at the heart of true creativity. When the effort to shine disappears, what's left is something much rarer, a voice that isn't echoing anyone else's, a voice that doesn't beg to be heard, but demands it, simply by being real in a world that screams for more. More effort, more success, more image. Charles Bukowski whispers something quieter, but infinitely more dangerous. Don't try. Not because life asks nothing of you, but because it asks for something real. Something unpolished, unforced, and born from the marrow of your own experience. Bukowski's life wasn't a blueprint for success. It was a war against falseness. He didn't seek to rise above the mess. He wrote from inside it, and in doing so, he revealed a deeper kind of truth. One that doesn't sparkle under stage lights, but hums in the silence between moments. To stop trying, in the Bukowskian sense, is not to quit. It is to shed the expectations, to strip away the voices telling you who to be, how to sound, what to want. It is a return to the raw pulse of being, where creation is instinct, not strategy, where pain becomes poetry, where rebellion is found not in noise, but in naked honesty. In a world obsessed with effort, Bukowski reminds us of the strange magic that happens when we finally let go. When we stop trying to impress and start telling the truth. When we stop climbing and start becoming. This isn't an excuse to drift, but an invitation to awaken, to listen, to live and create from the only place that ever mattered. The real you, beneath all the trying.